So we'll just kind of do a recap of where we are in the episode, introduce our guests, and then jump right in. So my name's Ashley Hazley. I'm the assistant director of U of L's Muhammad Ali Institute for Peace and Justice. In episode 4, we find ourselves in kind of a Indiana Jones kind of feeling plot and like world and adventure. We start to see Chick and his father work together, work with Letty, but we haven't seen them like truly work together for a goal yet. We also start to see Ruby kind of branch off on her own and start to really become central and key to some other plot pieces. We started to learn a little bit more about the Sons of Adam. It's a race to get these pages. And as I was doing research on this episode, I loved a renaming that happened. Instead of calling it A History of Violence, like the episode is called, someone called it The Legend of Letty, A Tick to the Past. And that was like my favorite thing that I saw about this episode. So can our guests introduce themselves, and in your introduction, just say like one huge takeaway you had from this episode?
Yeah, so I'm Emily Dixon. I use she, her pronouns, assistant director for the Dr. Patricia Office of Identity Inclusion, Dr. Patricia Carver Office of Identity Inclusion at Bellarmine University. And one big takeaway I got from this was not necessarily historical, but more so in terms of media, is just the lack of Black presence in certain genres of books and movies.
Hello. My name is Aaron Weathers. I use he, him, they, them pronouns. The assistant director at the U of L LGBT Center on the Health Sciences campus, and still, Lovecraft stan. My takeaway from this episode, very much similarly, like where are we at in the adventure genre? Like, why don't we get to go on trips and like adventures too?
Awesome. And just to backtrack, I don't know if in any of these videos I've said this, but it is important. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Thank you, Aaron, for always saying them. And then also thank you, Emily, for saying them. So yeah, you hit on something important, like where are we? Like in all these genres. I remember when I first started watching Lovecraft Country, I felt a little ignorant because I was like, wow, yeah, Black people read books. And like, not that I didn't think that we could read books or that we had never read books, but you don't see us appreciating literature in mainstream media at all. It's always weird if we do appreciate literature, right? It's always like, I identify as a blurred, so it's like finding out now that everyone was watching anime, I'm like, well, where were y'all at? Like, oh, okay, it's cool now. But so like, where are we in these different genres? This episode centers around a lot of different things, but very much so Tick, Letty, and Montrose go on this epic journey that feels like it's straight from an H.G. Wells novel, or it's straight from like Indiana Jones and Spielberg type stuff. And you really start to notice, and it like just drives home, that typically in film, media, literature, Black people are only at the center of some sort of struggle. Our stories are told for civil rights purposes. And if we are in some sort of adventure type role, we're in that role as a supporting character. Like very, very, very rarely are we in the center of it. And so it was cool. Indiana Jones stuff, that's not my jam. I don't really like those types of movies, but it was super cool to see Black people doing it. So what are some of y'all's thoughts on that? Just like how we're seen in media, and maybe some spaces that you think we need to get into or that we need to be accepted into.
Yeah, so I was like, I definitely first, if people don't know or whatnot about H.P. Lovecraft, like the fact that, Misha Green and all them, took this name, Lovecraft or whatnot, and then put all these Black people in it or whatnot, that in itself is a big point, because so H.P. Lovecraft had a short story called The Rats in the Walls. And it's funny because I'll say H.P. Lovecraft was very racist. I mean, very much so, because he even had a cat that was called N-word cat. So, you know, the fact that he had this cat and was very racist, and then Misha Green was like, oh, well, I'm going to scrap all of this and follow these Black folks in horror stories, like that in itself shows that it's time. Like, we should have been in these horror genres and different adventure genres, because, you know, as much as I love Lord of the Rings or whatnot, it was probably one of my favorites or whatnot, there were no Black people in Lord of the Rings. There were no Black people in Hobbiton, you know, Rivendell, none of these places. There was nothing semblance to a Black person or whatnot. And I think that's why a lot of Black people have not, like, you know, really delved into like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and things like that, because you really just didn't see a whole lot of Black folks. I mean, even now it took us, you know, look how long it's taken Marvel to really take off with Black people, because, you know, before Black Panther and, you know, a couple of other characters in the Marvel universe, it wasn't there. And so, you know, we appreciate folks like Stan Lee and other folks that have really pushed to put Black characters there, because now look at how many, you know, this generation and generations coming have like Black Panther and all these other characters to really look at. And so I think one of the things we really do is we do need more of ourselves in this fantasy space. You know, I appreciate the fact that like Disney created one Black fairy, you know, to hang out with Tinkerbell, but you know, we should have more realm into like fantasy spaces.
Definitely, I definitely agree to that too, and I think it's important to note too, like that Lovecraft Country. It started off as a novel as well. So like where it was by Matt Ruff, who's actually a white man. So it's interesting, like because you mentioned Stan Lee, and I was like, oh yeah, even like Matt Ruff, he wrote like Lovecraft, so and it was centering like Atticus and the family. They were Black, which I think it has has its own controversy as well. But I think when you have Misha Green taking it and adding that, I think you get the nuances of Blackness that makes it even greater. Now, no, I have not read the novel, The Lovecraft Country, so I can't critique it or anything like that. But I think just it is important for us to see that that adventure for Black folks. Just you get that from this episode. We can just delve into it.
And I think a larger comment in the fact that we aren't seen in those spaces, you know, folks would probably say, well, do Black folks write that sort of literature? Do Black folks, do they audition to be in those sorts of roles and that sort of thing? And it's this greater issue of like other people, those in control and those with the power, can't see us in those spaces. And it's almost a commentary on like the spaces that they do see us in, no matter how much that diversity and representation matters and all that, they are still seeing us as supporting characters, not able to take those leader type roles, right? Not able to like consider adventure and fantasy. And I think when you think about how imaginative and intelligent someone has to be to write in those genres, to like perform in those genres, when you leave us out of those genres, you're telling us that you don't think that we can be that imaginative and intelligent. And so I think it's just really interesting because it's something that I still literally see going on today. So what genres are we still missing from? You know, like I've started to see some genres incorporate at least a few more Black folks, but like where are we just still like we're not there?
I'll say we still, like, if you're going to go media, TV, all of that, we are still not in anime at all. We are not in anime. We are barely in video games. Or if we're in anime, I mean, it's so off, like, mainstream to find a Black person that actually looks like a Black person that's not a caricature. Because, you know, for the longest time, Black people the only Black character was Mr. Popo from like Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball and everything. Like, and then I think the beautiful thing for me was reading manga and stuff like that, like the Korean stuff, like which is kind of coincidental or whatnot, but there's a series called Soul to Soul, and there's a half Black, half Korean character, and I was like, oh, he looks Black, like, you know, he looks like he lives in New York, you know, and that's the whole point or whatnot. And so you start to see it, and that was when I was in high school. And then of course you had Carol and Tuesday come out last year or whatnot. I'm like, oh, Carol is Black, you know, she's got like locks and all this other stuff. And so, you know, we're just not there yet and everything. But I think the fact that you have like a Black anime studio opening up or whatnot, like we're starting to get there or whatnot. But also, even in video games, outside of like, you know, the stereotypical, you know, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, blah, blah, like stuff like that, we're not really in films and those kind of genres.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, definitely. Like when you said video games, I could only think of like Jax from like Mortal Kombat and like his daughter, like Jackie Briggs, and then the awful like stereotypes like Grand Theft Auto. But I think like even like for me, like I really would love to see us more in like historical fiction. I love like the rewriting of the history, and I think that for me, like when I think about the Black experience, and they ever ask us like, what decade, you know, do you want to go into? Like they used to ask that all the time, like, what's your favorite decade? What decade would you go back to? And it's kind of like, Black folks, I never wanted to go back, you know, because we know what that history is. And I think that that's kind of a part of why it's not, Black folks don't get to go on these adventures, because it's always that we were never allowed our agency and our subjectivity. You know, we were seen as historically as objects. And even you could even say today is seen as not having that, being robbed of our humanity and our subjectivity. So I think that it's just, we don't have the opportunities to see us in those roles, those things, those roles, that genre. So I would love to see historical fiction. Maybe we can go back and see let's say like Black Wall Street, but Tulsa doesn't get burned down. Actually, the Black folks actually win and you know, thwart them off, or something like that. I would think it would be really interesting to see us rewriting these things of the past in a different way.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you're starting to see folks like acknowledge Tulsa now, right? Like, yeah, Watchmen acknowledge Tulsa. Maybe Lovecraft Country. Well, no, they've already referenced it, so never mind. They're referencing Tulsa, and so I think that would be an awesome thing to see. Because has there been a movie where they even just show like what it looked like? And that would be awesome. That would be so awesome. So moving on, we've the Sons of Adam. They kind of resurface. They're trying to get these pages before Tick, Montrose, and Letty get these pages. So do you all have like any thoughts on the Sons of Adam? Like, who are they? Like, what do you think their purpose is? I get kind of like a mythical or magical Ku Klux Klan vibe from the Sons of Adam. But just wanted some of your thoughts. Maybe there's been some like Easter eggs or like hints dropped that you'd want to reference.
The only thing I kind of think about it is like the Good Old Boys Club almost. Very much I want power, and I want to hold that power for those that look like me, specifically white men, you know, and we're gonna like, you know, hold that out, and it doesn't matter who gets hurt or left out or oppressed by it. Yeah, it's kind of just a Good Old Boys Club, I think of it as.
So for me, and this is kind of giving some background for me or whatnot, it's really Masonic. It's very Masonic. And it's a mix of like Masonic plus magical plus Ku Klux Klan, I'll say, because the Masonic piece comes in, and you know, before anybody watches this, I am a member of the Order of Eastern Star, so no rabbit hole here. I'm actually a member. But so it's very much, because if you look at the story of Freemasonry in the United States or whatnot, it was very much all white men. They were very powerful folks. Like your first presidents were all Freemasons. Most white presidents have been Freemasons or whatnot. It's in the structure of DC, blah, blah, this and the third. It's interesting when Tick comes in, because to me, being that I'm Prince Hall affiliated, he's a Black man trying to get into this Masonry line. And that's kind of how it was with Prince Hall. You all of a sudden had this Black person that's trying to get into a white, Masonic. So then it's like, well, I'm gonna just start my own. And it kind of shows you how Tick, starts to get into this journey of, I'm gonna find my way through this and everything. I'm affiliated with this, so I'm gonna find my own way or whatnot. So it kind of made for that or whatnot. Where it gets weird is, so like, I feel like this kind of, and I feel like people probably looked at this way or whatnot, because you also have, that rabbit hole of folks that feel like, oh, well, Masons are the Illuminati and they're tied to magic and soul ties and blah, blah, blah. So it kind of plays on that a little bit for me or whatnot. But then, yeah, you do get that mythical type of organization and everything. You think Greek mythology a little bit, like, so, and the fact that all of these powerful people that are in Sons of Adam are just so happen to be white leaders, it does kind of tie into the Masonic piece a little bit or whatnot. But that's literally what I thought of.
So that's so cool that it's the Easter Star. I just know my grandmother. I have family members that are in the Freemasonry, as well as like Easter Star, and I'm probably like I'm abbreviating that. But just for me, somebody who's outside of it, it's always been that like, ooh, what is it that it like interest because it is a secret society, and so and I know nothing. I know there's like 32 or 33 like levels like in Freemasonry. I know somebody's a 33, but I try to ask them questions and they wouldn't tell me anything. So like, I still want to know.
Yeah, I would say we don't talk about it, but if you are on the other side of it and you start to see stuff in TV or whatnot, because all of a sudden you'd be like, oh, okay, because like even in Queen Sugar, they have a funeral for one of the characters, and it's a Masonic funeral, and you wouldn't realize that until you're like, okay, or whatnot. But you start to see, and I think this episode made me kind of think of, I could kind of see where the Prince Hall piece starts to come in a little bit. So I would be really curious if some of the writers are affiliated, just to see if that's how it came up.
Awesome. Yeah, I like hadn't made like connections to Masonry from that. So I think that's super interesting. So Ruby and William's relationship. So that was something that I never expected. I think as I was like just kind of making sure I had my research together, it was like, what are the top 3 WTF moments from Lovecraft Country? And that was one of them. And I would challenge that, but that was one of them. So you've got William, who is, we don't know yet, but connected to the Braithwaites. It seems like he's like a family friend. And then you have Ruby, who is Letty's sister. In the episode before, Letty and Ruby had a really bad argument where, they just kind of fell out based on how Letty spent their mother's money. Sorry about tongue-tied. And like surrounding like the mother's death, and like that continues to be a theme. But so Ruby really is kind of like set off. She's got this goal to work at a department store. And then she comes across William, and they have some interactions. And then by the end of the episode, like they actually have sex with one another. During that scene, they play I Put a Spell on You, which I thought it's a great song, but it was interesting because they played the Marilyn Manson version of it instead of the Nina Simone version of it. And so I'm just wondering, I saw your heads like, I was wondering, did you all have any thoughts surrounding that scene? Like we talked about a few videos ago, the importance of the soundtrack of Lovecraft Country. So just like, what are some of your thoughts there? Oh, you're muted.
I think I'll say, yeah, I was gonna say the importance of the soundtrack has always been a thing. So think it might be interesting that it's Marilyn Manson or whatnot, because he's always been associated with otherworldly type. I mean, even in the performance aspect or whatnot. So that's very interesting. But in that particular, I would say it's kind of a question of who is putting a spell on who, because Ruby is a go-getter. I'll say Ruby is going to get it done. She's going to do it however it needs to get done, whatever she has to do to get to the top. So it's like, well, who is putting a spell on who? Is it Ruby is putting the spell on William? Or is it William putting the spell on, I'll say, on Ruby? Like, I think the whole part was kind of very interesting to see play out.
Definitely. You got to give it up for Miss Ruby Baptiste. But like, I think too, like, we have to like, it's almost, you want to need to unpack like the dynamics and the politics of like interracial relationships, interracial sex. Cause at first Ruby's like, I'm not about to let this white, you know, like this white boy pretty much like come on to me. And it's very, like for somebody that has, like me personally, I've been in interracial relationships, just having that dynamic of, am I being seen as a person and is valuable, or am I being exoticized? Am I being fetishized? You have to think about those things, because we all still live in this socio-cultural political context of America, which, you know, is white supremacist, anti-blackness, capitalist, cisgender, heteropatriarchy. So, you know, you have to think about all of these ideas and isms that are going on, even in our interpersonal relationships that we think might be outside of that.
No, yeah. What did you say? You said socio-political.
Just all of it. That's just
all of it.
You know, the smorgasbord, the socio-cultural, political.
All of it.
All the isms.
All of it. No. So, you know, not gonna do any spoilers, but I did just want to like actually touch on the fact that that song was played at the peak of Ruby and William's, like, maybe not the peak, but as they're climbing to the climax of their relationship with each other and like their feelings for one another, because it's gonna come up and be really important. And I would love to revisit that conversation of I'll Put a Spell on You as the rest of the series continues. So I guess the last piece that we can kind of talk about is Yahima, who Letty, Tick, and Montrose, they get to where they need to get to in this epic grand adventure, and they're met with a siren, and the siren's name is Yahima. And you see that physically, and I think they actually say it in the episode as well, that Yahima is a two-spirit person, a two-spirit individual. What that means for folks who have not heard of that before is it was like an indigenous and native term used to indicate a person whose body simultaneously houses a masculine spirit and a feminine spirit. Now that is the traditional sense of that word, but throughout Native and indigenous culture, like they've used it for other interpretations and branches off that main concept. So, like, how powerful was it to see that, to see an indigenous person, to then also see an indigenous person that was two-spirit, and then, again, y'all, don't watch these if you haven't watched the episode, but then for Montrose to kill this person, right? This person was robbed of their voice as a way to actually come back into, I guess, the real world, or, you know, like back into the boarding house. So they couldn't speak. But then Montrose, because he wants to, supposedly because he wants to protect Tick and Letty, kills this person. So what are your thoughts surrounding all of that I just said?
So, Yahima is supposed to be from Guyana, right? I think that was alluded or whatnot. That in itself, so I did some digging and did some research on Guyana. And if you know anything about Guyana and everything, to be LGBT, especially, you know, more so homosexual and everything, is illegal still. And you can actually be, you know, in jail, life imprisonment, and all of these things or whatnot. So the fact that this is a two-spirit character from this country or whatnot, it's kind of interesting that it's shown that way. And I wonder if the fact that, you know, it almost makes you wonder, because I know they had taken Yahima for the purpose of translating, you know, these documents or whatnot. But I also wonder if there's a small piece that saved Yahima from being, you know, attacked and imprisoned and all these things in Guyana or whatnot, because this has been part of the culture or whatnot. But in terms of like TV, we don't really see indigenous people on TV like that, more so except for, you know, the story of like Pocahontas and, you know, tribal conquest, you know, Dances with Wolves, that kind of stuff. Like we don't really see indigenous people up there, and we really don't see intersectional, like indigenous and, you know, two-spirit, indigenous and something else or whatnot. So it was really powerful, but then at the same time, the fact that it was silenced so violently or whatnot, it's almost like a reference to the world, to life and everything. Like you'll have indigenous culture, and then all of a sudden it's silence, whether it's government or, you know, being shoved a place or whatnot. Like it was almost like a literal, you know, a figurative reference of that happening to the indigenous culture overall.
Absolutely, like I couldn't agree more. That, especially that like last part, the disposability, the gratuitous violence. I think that indigenous, particularly indigenous and also trans and non-binary identities, but then I think you look at the intersection of that that they face, and it just, to me, like, I don't want to do too many spoiler alerts too, especially like coming like from Montrose. But I think it's also that it's that silencing of something that was fundamental that our worlds, or these worlds nowadays, are living off of too, I believe. You know, it was the beginning, it was the origin of you know, for the Book of Names, the son of Adam, that language, and just cut it off, like it doesn't exist. It was sickening though. It just was. I think honestly it was one of the most I think it's one of the most gory. Well, no, never mind. Episode 1's pretty gory. But like I was gonna say, it's one of the more like graphic, violent moments on the series, in my opinion. And it was really gratuitous.
Yeah. It was a lot. I mean, I like that the champion thing that I did when I realized, it's like, oh wow, like, yo, this is somebody indigenous. They're bringing in indigenous folks. Like, this show's so lit. And then I was like, oh, two-spirit folks. Like, there's queer people on this show. I was like, that's so lit. And then Montrose killed them. And I was like, wow. But I will say, in this conversation, maybe my thoughts have changed a little bit, because I think it really was representative of Letty, Atticus, and Montrose went out of their way to travel to where this person was, stole from this person, which silenced them, and then this person was violently killed. And that is the story of colonization. That's just what it is. And then they get to capitalize, and really it was integral to their success, what was taken from indigenous folks. So like, maybe I don't hate it as much, but I still just really wanted that two-spirit, beautiful indigenous person just to kind of like be a part of the show. But yeah.
I still hate it, but it's just as much as I hate the story of capitalism. So I think that's just it.
I got you. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for episode 4. Again, we will link to anything kind of pertinent that we discussed during this episode. Thanks to our guests for joining us. And Aaron, you can stop the recording.